I would say that writing is equal to your personality. Yes, it will be, when because your reader or your recipient is not basically in contact with you directly. Now, whenever you are writing, you have to go through a certain process. You must, because if you don't, then it is not professional. Then it cannot be. Then it can actually reflect onto your own personality. So going through that process, there are a few questions that a writer has to ask. First of all, you have to see, how do I begin? Now, this basically is making you realize, what am I writing? Am I writing a business communication? Okay, this is a business communication. What kind of communication am I making? So am I writing a letter? Am I writing a report? Am I writing a memo? All of these things, they have different formats. Is it an email? So following that format and how to begin that, you have to understand that first. Purpose. You always have to know the purpose, because business documents have to be clear and concise. They should not be staggering all along, because everyone who is working does not have enough time. So they want to get to the purpose, get to the point, and then find the appropriate answer or a follow-up. Create a logical flow. You have to be, and again, we're going to be knowing a little bit about the planning process. Creating a flow of your writing is one of the most important stages of your planning and one of the most important factors in your writing. And errors, your message, how are you supposed to create the whole message? You are going to see all of that. So the writing process basically has three stages. The first one is the planning, longer process, and very important process. Second is your writing, and third is your quality control. I personally believe that if you spend more time and more positive energy on your planning, your writing process, which is basically your execution process, is going to be much better and much easier. And finally comes the quality control process, which basically is the final step before you are making your writing public. So when you are looking at the planning process, you can have the planning any way you want. First, you have to gather all the information, depending on the format, depending on your writing, depending on your audience. You really have to make sure who your audience are and who the readers are. Is this communication valid for more people or only one person and everything? What are you supposed to write for them? And before writing, do brainstorm. You can use brainstorming cloud, you can use a flow chart, you can just put up headings, pointers, everything, because the worst thing that anyone can do, especially if you are having a business communication, is send a message and then send another message asking to ignore the first one because you have done some additions in the new message. This is the worst impression that you can give. Why? Because number one, it shows that you were not basically interested in creating that message. Number two, you're not very professional because you're careless. And number three, you have a lot of time to waste and you don't want anyone getting that impression. So having a good planning, knowing exactly what you're going to write, and then compiling a correct message is very important, which comes in your planning process. Now, once your planning is done, and if your planning is very good, then the writing, the execution is way, way, way easier. You can follow whatever you have planned and you can execute that. You can write down. Now, if it's a report, you know exactly that it has to start with a title, then it has to have an abstract, then it has to have a slight smaller summary, and then you come to the introduction. With your introduction, you're following it up with your graphs and charts and all the explanations, and finally going to a conclusion. That's a long report, but when you know exactly what you're going to do, when you have enough information, you can easily write it down. You have completed the writing process. Now comes the very important part, which is the quality control. You have to be your own biggest critic. Read through and proofread your entire document and find mistakes. If there are no mistakes, try to find how can you improve it. If you have enough time, try improving it. Make the best version of your writing, because that version of your writing is your own reflection when it goes to the reader. So give the readers the best impression that you can, and follow the right steps. Follow the steps of planning, writing, and quality control before you hit send. That is a very important tip. So when you are looking into good writing, few things that you have to kind of look into. Number one, completeness, correctness, and credibility. All of these things, they're basically coming in your planning process. Complete information, complete pattern, complete format, everything in your writing is very important. Correctness and credibility of your information, as well as the language that you are using. Then clarity and conciseness. This comes in your writing stage. Write it clearly, write all the information clearly and to the point. Explain what needs to be explained. Avoid what needs to be avoided. Consider your audiences throughout. And vitality, use the active voice or passive voice, that depends, but it's very important, especially if you're using creative writing. So let's talk about the business writing. There are different forms of business writings that I have also just talked about. Business writing basically is very important, and being very correct, being credible, being very conscious is very important in business documents, because when you are communicating, when you are sending out a message to any receivers outside of the company, you are not sending it in your personal capacity. This has to be kept in mind. You are only a representative and ambassador of the company that you're working in. So whatever you're doing, you are giving the impression of the company. Now, whatever you are creating and you're sending out, the receivers are going to take the impression of the company through that communication. So your responsibility is basically multiplied many times than as a personal communication. So whenever you are receiving or you are writing any business document, these questions need to be considered. What is this document about? Why has it come to be? Who wrote it? How is it organized? What is it trying to accomplish, and does it support the conclusion? All of these things, they have to be addressed, which will actually complete your document, and again, it will give the correct impression of the organization that you are working for. You have to be careful of three major things. First of all, your image plus your company image, because if a business communication has errors in it, it is careless. That's it. No one will ever take that, okay, this was a human error. No, you are careless because you were not focusing on creating the correct document. Errors in terms of spellings, grammars, providing documents, attachments, all of these things, they all basically can be your errors. You have to correct them and follow the format. If you're writing an email, try only writing an email. Do not put a report format or any other format. You have to also know what are the formats your company is using that you can replicate in your templates. So the different types of business writings basically are emails, letters and memos, agendas, reports, promotional materials, academic documents, as well as researches. We're going to look into the emails. Now, emails basically are the most convenient and the most common and preferred manner of communication, especially professionally and in the organizations. So when you're writing an email, your email must always have the subject, because the subject, any email, any professional email going without subject is again very unprofessional, because through your subject you are prompting your reader or the receiver of what you're going to be discussing. Keep one thing in mind: just as you are busy in your offices, everyone else outside is also busy. So having the subject, clarifying it, and then even writing the email in a proper manner, concise, with short sentences and short paragraphs, using bullet points, this makes the reading easy. Avoid the ready, aim, and fire approach. Now, ready, aim, and fire approach is basically, it's a military term, and it's more of giving orders. So whenever you're writing an email, avoid giving orders, even if it is an internal email or an external email. Compose your email in a manner where you are giving the message also, but you're using a very professional tone. Because again, everyone at any capacity who is working has a dignity, and they would not be, and they would not take a tone which is not appropriate and which is not professional. Do not be casual. And the emails are a very appropriate tool, but sometimes we make a very major mistake of using the thread. We just reply all, or we just reply on the same thread. Try not doing that until and unless that thread is very important for the reader, because normally the email threads, they break the concentration, they can cause confusions, and if the receiver is not supposed to get any extra information, there's no point of sending them any extra information. In your emails, try making one point at a time. If you have more points, divide them in small paragraphs, or prefer the bullet points, because this makes the reading easier. And one very important factor, use the correct sentence cases. Completely smalls or completely lowercase or completely uppercase in writing an email is highly unprofessional and unacceptable at a lot of places. So if you look at a few of the email etiquettes, always proofread before hitting send. You have to proofread, you have to verify all the information. A lot of people make a very, very unprofessional mistake of, we are sending you this document, that document, blah, 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 and then they would just hit send. And later on they would realize, oh, I forgot to attach. And then they have to send the whole the email again, which is number one, embarrassing. And number two, why do you want to do that? When you read your email yourself, you realize when you read it again, you involuntarily switch to the receiver's end, and then you come to then you start seeing the thing from the other person's perspective. And then, so if you have mentioned any attachments, make sure there are attachments. If you have not written the subject line, you will write the subject line. So proofreading is very important. Be clear and concise and thorough. In professional emails, make sure you have the company's signature. And the company signatures are approved by HR and by the departments, and then they are basically in the emails. If you are emailing a lot of people, do not CC or do. If you are only copying people, then, and if you're supposed copying 50 people, write their emails in BCC, not CC, because when you write them in BCC, what happens is that the receiver will only receive their own name and no other email addresses. In this way, you are keeping other people's email addresses confidential, as well as you're following a decorum of emails. If you receive an email, you always have to give a response. Now, response can be noted for I will follow up, or received, or anything, but your sender should get an acknowledgement. So always send an acknowledgement. We talked about the chain and about emotions. When you're writing any professional email, even if you're very emotional about anything, keep your emotions under control. Write an email which is very professional, which is adequate to the language, in terms of language and everything. Use the subject line, and if you're out of office, you should always have an autoresponder giving out the message of when you will be returning. So here I have a few examples of good professional emails, and then I have a few examples of not very good professional emails. So if you notice over here, we have the email address to, so whoever is going to be receiving, there is no CC or BCC, and then there is a subject line. The subject is clearly stating what will be in the email. Then there is a salutation. You have to address directly to whoever you are, you want to communicate. So writing their name and then dividing the email in smaller paragraphs with the contents that are necessary. A closing is always very important. Like I said, kindly send me the details to the earliest, and then regards, and then the name. So this is one of the professional email, which is a good example. We have another one over here, which has a CC because there's only one. If you have more people who are CC'd, you can just write those emails in BCC, and then you have a subject line, and then further on you have that, you have the message. This is basically an example of a bad email because it's number one, it's written in all caps, which is unacceptable. And number two, the salutation, my brother, you do not do that. If it's a professional email, it has to go with dear Mr. or Miss whoever, so that you know it's more professional. There are no paragraphs in this email. There are no breaks in this email. So a reader would not even go through first two lines, and they would be either confused or just be bored of reading whatever it is. So creating the image, creating a visual image which is attractive to the reader is also the job of the writer, and this also comes in your writing skills. So make sure you are creating a writing which is attractive to a reader so that the reader wants to go through it. If you have included bullet points which with very short points, the reader might skip the first two paragraphs, but they would want to read the points, what they are saying. So you are basically giving out the message, and your message is being received easily. Now, I have a small comparison of two emails, and one is a good one and the other one is bad. So if you notice, the email has been sent to any offices, all staff members. So in the first one, which is a good example, we have schedule change request for June 27th. And in the other one, our subject is help. So do you see the difference? The language is making the formal communication completely informal. And further on, there are spelling mistakes also, there are sentence mistakes also in the second email, but the first email is concise, it is to the point, it is talking about what the problem is, what could be the solution, and what is requested, which are the three major things that you have to cover in your emails. Now, when we talk about letters and memos, memos are basically used in businesses, in offices, for internal communication, while letters are normally, they are used for external communications. Letters are also used for internal communications at times, but mostly they're used for external communications between organizations, between offices. Now, they are very common, they're very important, and letters are more of the formalization of a lot of communications. They should always include a heading or a letterhead. So if there is a letter or a memo, and it is not on the letterhead of the company, it is losing its validity. So any letter, any official communication that is supposed to be done through any letters, it should be done on the company letterheads. They have to have the date. The date is important because the information that's provided in that letter or the memo, it reflects the validity of the information. The address, salutations, subject line, all of these things, they come in the formats of the letters, and then comes the body. The body, again, like we discussed, the body of the email also has to reflect in the body of letters also. It has to be to the point. It has to address the point very well. It has to be conclusive, and if needed, it should have any window of follow-up if needed. And finally, having a closing and signatures should be there. If you're enclosing any documents along with the letter, they all should be mentioned at the bottom of the letter, in the end of the letter. So why is this important? Because if in your letter you're giving an information that certain documents are provided, then they should be provided and they should be listed. Suppose for any reason, any one of the document is misplaced, it will be reflected in the documents that it was provided, and maybe it could have been later on misplaced. So when you look at this letter, this is basically one of the format of letters where you have two addresses, the sender's address and receiver's address. Not all companies follow the same pattern. So the format that is basically accepted by the company that you are working in, that has to be followed. But there are certain things, there are certain etiquettes that everyone has to follow, and they are the salutation, if you notice, there's the date, if you notice, and then the division of your letter. Finally, coming to the conclusion and regards. This is the cover letter basically, and if you notice over here, we have the paragraphs divided. They're small. Even if you don't want to go through them, you can look at the bullet points, and the bullet points actually are going to give you a little bit of an idea, and through these you can also pick and choose what you want to read, what information you want to gather, and then further on. But the letter by itself has offered everything, so that the reader does not have to go around and look for information. So we've studied about the letters and memos and emails. Now we're going to come to reports. And reports are very important when it comes to business communication and office management. Why? Because reports are, they basically are an amalgam of information that has been created by teams. So the reports having the right format and the presentation of information in the correct manner is very important. So when you are writing a report, just make sure that you are addressing some of the very important areas, which is number one, define the main point. What is the point of the report? And does your report actually fulfill this requirement? Secondly, define the goals and objectives. You can have a report to be done on marketing, but what exactly? The forecast of marketing or the achievements of marketing? They're two divided areas. They're two completely different areas. So you have to, number one, your main point as well as your objectives and goals are to understand what is required in this information. Then collect the evidence needed to support the main points. So your information gathering and the use of your correct information in the correct manner is very important. How are you creating that flow? How are you creating the flow of information is very important, and that goes basically through the evidence. Organization of the report, what template are you following, and are you fulfilling the template? And conclusions and recommendations. Reports are only created for better recommendations. Reports give the information, a bulk of information that can be collected, but all that information basically is leading you towards a new venture. So if you want to go towards a new venture, you need good recommendations. Those recommendations can only be given by people who have the information, who have created the report. So this is a responsibility of the people who are creating the report to give the correct recommendations, to give a good conclusion. Few samples of reports. Basically, if you have a design report, it's science lab report, you have the title, you have the research question, background information, hypothesis, variables, control of variables, materials and methods. Then we have the data collection part, and finally we have the conclusion and evaluation. So if you notice the flow, the entire flow is leading you towards an evaluation. It is leading you towards a new information, towards a conclusion that is going to give you more and more venues. Now, the other type, it's basically an industrial training report sample. You have the front page preface, then you have introduction, body training report, conclusion, and bibliography. So all of these things, basically what they're doing is they give you a format, and if you follow the right format, you're getting to the right conclusion and good recommendations. This was about business communication, which is one form of professional communication. Now we're going to talk a little bit about creative writing, and creative writing is also a professional writing. Creative writing, basically, it focuses more on creativity. It focuses more on opinions and ideas, and it basically reflects a state of mind, maybe of a society, of a certain person. So this is an art, and this art is also formalized through different venues. Creative writing can be a novel, it can be a short story, it can be a song, a poetry, even speeches, debates. All of these things, they basically are creative writings. Why? Because they are including personalities, they're including personal opinions, they're including a lot of, how do I put it? They're including a lot of creativity in them. So it's basically an art. When there are basically four types of creative writings. There are narrative. Narratives are basically when you are trying to narrate a story, when you're telling a story. So more of the story writing, short stories, novels, and books, they all come into creative writing. Then we have the descriptive writings. In they also have pretty much of this narration, but description can also come in marketing materials, magazines. So these kind of writings basically are the descriptive but creative writings. They have opinions in them, they have facts in them, and then they are creating that visual environment in which the reader can find something new. Then we have positional writings, which basically are more of presenting someone's opinions more. So more of opinion essays, more of reviews, and all of these things, they come into your positional writing. And finally comes the persuasive writing, which are when you are persuading over a certain point of view. They can be a debate, they can be speeches, and all of these writings, they come into your persuasive writings, and they are all different types of creative writings. So we have a little bit of description of all of these also. When you're talking about the expository writing, the business letters, and these, then descriptive writings are journal or diary writing, or novels and fictions. Then we have the narrations. They can be oral, they can be written, songs, stories, and everything. And persuasive writing, more than essays, I would say they are more of the debates and speeches that come in that. So the different types of writings in creative perspective we have are poetries and plays, movies, scripts, television scripts, novels, songs, memoirs, or personal essays. All of these, they come into your creative writing. And again, you have to keep one thing in mind, they all have their different formats. So if you are trying to write a poem, you cannot write a poem in terms as a short story. Or if you're writing a short story, you cannot be very rhythmic about it, because a poem has a rhythm, because that is the format of a poem. A poem has, poetry has a lot of meanings enclosed in small writings. But on the other hand, stories or novels, they're supposed to be elaborate, they're supposed to be descriptive, they're supposed to be narrative. So you have to select the correct format and then furnish it. How do you furnish it? If you have a good planning, go through a good planning, make the correct mind map, brainstorm as much as you can, try to get as many suitable words or adjectives, just to make your creative writing more colorful, more flourishing, more expressive. And the more your writing is expressive, the more your reader would understand you in lesser time. And this is basically what is going to make you into a better creative writer. So before I finish it, there are basically 10 rules which must be followed for all kinds of writings. Number one, know what you want to say before you say it. I want to write a story. I'm not going to write an email. I have to know exactly what I have to write. Keep it simple if necessary. Use bullet points if necessary. What's in it for me? Very important question. You have to understand, what am I gaining in the end because of this? Don't get bogged down. Do not get discouraged. Call to action and edit. Spell check. Proofread. Very important. And take 5 minutes before you hit send. So whatever you are sending, just make sure that you are 100% sure and confident that whatever you are sending is going to be a good representation of yourself. And if necessary, always follow up. Because any message that you're sending out, if there is no follow-up on it, or if there is there's no response on it, then there's no point of such dead communication. Keep your communication alive, keep your communication healthy, and keep your communication the best version and personality of yourself. Thank you. Okay. If you have any questions, you can please go ahead and ask. Let me just see how I can unmute everyone.
Hi, Professor. This is Henry.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's Aisha. I think it's Miss Aisha. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Very
You.
informative. Very unfortunate I joined little late actually because I tried for the thing. Yeah, so first few slides, 1 or 2 slides, I missed it. It's
Okay.
okay, but I
Then
can
don't
get
do
to
it. The
it.
first few slides were just an introduction.
Okay, so that means I didn't miss much. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you didn't miss much. I hope you did understand and you did gather some information that I tried
Yeah,
to give.
lectures, reports, and like communication, like all
Yes.
those things, business mails. And you said about the trail mails, right? When you were talking about the
Yes.
trail mails,
Yes.
don't
Change.
just keep replying to the trail mail what was your thing, right? Because it will be confusing. That's true.
Exactly.
Tracing becomes difficult. But if a person, for example, sends a mail, so you want us to send a separate mail as a reply, or we don't have to send it as a chain mail? What's
Um,
your
it's basically, if the chain is not necessary, it is just feasible to start a new email. Just reply with this
okay?
new email and keep it short. Because, like if there is a chain, number one, there could be any information that is confidential and you might not want to send it to them. You can't revert that. So you do not want to risk, especially with official documents which are confidential. It's better not to take a risk. Starting a new
Okay,
chain or starting a new email is more convenient.
okay. Thank you. That is really wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're
Actually.
welcome. You're welcome.
Hi, Professor. The presentation was amazing. I was just looking if we can get a bit of the slides or there is some directives we can keep them as a reference.
Okay, sure.
How are you
Hi,
doing?
Mr. Henry. How are you?
I'm doing fine, good on you.
I'm good, thank you. You can communicate with the college and
Okay,
the
I will.
can provide you with more.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's very nice to see you, by the way.
It's very informative, very helpful, and very useful also, right?
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. Thank you very
and yeah, something like this on grammar, if you can just have one webinar, the
much. Okay.
introductory aspect of it, like just a suggestion, it
Uh-huh.
will be useful for many people actually. The normal mistakes, the common mistakes what people use,
Exactly.
like the
Yes.
communication. So if
Sure.
you can, because since you're doing an excellent job, it would be a great help. Like I
Thank you.
attended the previous webinar also. This is the second I'm attending.
Yes. I will
So
see you.
really, yeah, it's really informative and yeah, it's very useful too. So if such thing like on grammar, the commonest mistakes
Sure.
people use in communication. So
I can actually forward your recommendation because grammar by itself is a whole subject.
exactly.
And, so I mean, I personally did not want to only involve it here because I wouldn't have done justice to it. So, with grammar, basically, it's a complete different paradigm. And if we go into that, then, we can have the step by step things that we can discuss, even in like a subject, sentence construction, or even in the subject line how to use
Okay.
grammar and how to use. So we will do that. I will definitely forward your recommendation.
Yeah, that is it. The commonest mistakes which people use in business communications, like such things, if you can
Okay.
give. So that will be really helpful for many people actually, especially the correspondence would be really richer and better
Exactly.
actually.
And especially in these times because everything is online, so everything is
Exactly.
communicated through emails. So the most important thing right now is not to make mistakes.
That is the thing. That's the thing, actually.
Right?
Very nice.
Yes. So
But it's really very interesting, very wonderful, like way of this topic. It's starting from the topic and the way you had just taken the information. It's very, very informative,
thank you
very
very
useful,
much.
actually, very helpful also. Yeah,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Yes, this is a huge encouragement, actually. I mean, you work really hard, and then you just do it. And if anyone says you it was good, then you go like, yes, I've done it.
Really, the top, it starts from the topic. I really was impressed with the topic, and the way you had handled it and the way you presented it is wonderful, actually. Very clear, and it is understandable, and it makes us learn many things.
Thank you
So,
so
yeah,
much.
to be precise, very informative also. Yeah,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. I'm flattered. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, actually.
So, if anyone has any questions, anything to share with us, I really like sharing of experiences. I mean, any kind of experiences that you have had in any kind of communication, writing processes. Is there anyone a creative writer over here? Mm-mm. Doesn't seem like anyone is. Yeah, we're mostly professional people. We hardly get time. But I personally like writing. So I mean, I like writing fiction, short stories, and everything. So whenever I get time, I prefer doing that because it just it makes you express your feelings better. So if if you don't have any comments or questions, I think we're gonna end the webinar.
Yeah,
Everyone should stay home, stay safe, be happy,
yeah.
and let's keep hoping that very soon we're all gonna be back to work, back to our normal lives.
You also take care, be safe.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot. God
Bye.
bless you. Have a nice and wonderful time. Yeah, it was very nice being with you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very
Thanks a
much.
lot.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.